Chapter 323, Deathgate SG-1. Friday, August 16, 1996, Department of Mysteries Location Classified Department of Magic United States of America Commander Joseph hugely looked at the contraption in disbelief. "You're going to send that in? It looks like something my kid got out of a Muggle toy store." Michael Durant nodded. "It looks ridiculous, but it should work. It runs by remote control, and it doesn't have anything organic in it which can disintegrate." Hugely groaned. "What is it supposed to be? A tank of some sort?" "Yup, it's an M1A1 Abrams. I got a 1-foot model, complete with remote control and treads, out of a hobbyist store. It's took a week or so to put together, and much to my amazement, I was able to assemble it without breaking anything." Hugely put his hands over his eyes. "That's very reassuring. I really needed that." Durant shrugged. "If it's any consolation, sir, it only cost $99.95, 10 galleons. For something that cheap, it's worth trying it at least once." Hugely, resigned, stared at the closed death gate. "Well, I suppose we can give it a shot. How exactly are you going to do this?" Durant pointed at some of the other Muggle equipment on the table. "Well, we've got an old Muggle video camera here, which we're planning on attaching to the top of the tank. It's got an electrical cord coming out the back, which we've plugged into the generator on your right. If there's any problem, we can always pull on the cord and yank the thing back out." Hugely wasn't convinced. That is, assuming that the cord doesn't break when it goes through. Durant sighed. "There isn't much we can do about that, I'm afraid. We can only hope that this backup measure will work. At any rate, we're going to put some other equipment inside the tank as well." He moved on down the table. "This is a thermometer. We're assuming that the other side is at normal temperatures, but we're not sure. This here is a Muggle light bulb which will come in handy in case we can't see anything. Finally, we've got a little note saying that we came in peace and are simply trying to explore." "You think they'll believe it?" "I don't see why they shouldn't, sir. It's not like we can just walk in there and conquer it. After all, it's a one-way trip." Hugely looked down at the little tank and laughed. "I must say, Michael, this is probably one of the most bizarre ideas you've ever thought up, and that's saying something. You've definitely piqued my curiosity, however. How long will it take to make final preparations?" Michael bent down and picked up the tank. "I'd say a couple of hours, sir. I'll call you back when I'm ready to go." Hugely nodded. "Make it so, Michael. I'll be back in a couple of hours." 2 hours later, Durant and Hugely were sitting in the observation room above the death chamber. The model tank had been moved into position about 5 feet from the death gate, whose door was still closed. Hugely suddenly thought of something. "You're sure this isn't going to kill us all? I mean, messing around with a death gate, particularly trying to get information from them, is probably something whoever designed them isn't going to like." Durant grinned. "That's why we're up here, sir. I've also taken the liberty of moving everyone in the 2 adjacent labs down to the lower levels in case there's a problem. I know, I should have probably gone through you." Hugely shrugged. "Don't worry about it. Has the remote control been tested?" Durant responded by pushing a button on a Muggle gizmo in his hands. The tank moved forward a foot or so. "How about the recording device?" Durant pushed some more buttons, and a view of the door to the death gate appeared on a Muggle TV monitor. "Everything's working fine, sir. In addition, we'll be able to see what the camera is seeing in real time. Everything's go, sir. Just give the order." Hugely grunted in satisfaction. "Commence the operation." Durant nodded and brought out his wand. Pointing it at the death gate, he shouted, "Aperio." The metal plate sealing off the death gate slowly slid aside, revealing the entrance to the death gate itself. As usual, it had the appearance of a black curtain which was fluttering slowly even though there were no air currents in the room. The opening of the death gate triggered caterwauling charms throughout the immediate area. In addition, a huge circle of flame surrounded the death gate, hovering a couple of feet above the ground. The fire ignited automatic to prevent people from accidentally running into the death gate while it was open. The barrier was far enough above the ground to not interfere with the electrical cords connecting the video camera with its power supply. Durant glanced at Hugely. "I'll start moving in now. Keep an eye on that display." Hugely watched the Muggle screen as the death gate grew closer and closer. Meanwhile, Durant kept on calling out the distance. 3 feet, 2 feet, 18 inches. I'm slowing down. 15 inches until camera penetration, 2 inches until the front of the gun touches the barrier. Hugely found himself holding his breath. "Take it in, Michael. Nice and slow." Durant nodded and continued the operation. 14, 13, 12. "Sir, the end of the gun has made contact with the death gate. It's about 1 inch in now." Hugely looked at the screen intently. The death gate didn't seem to have changed much. It was almost as if it hadn't felt the gun poking into it. Durant pressed another button. "I'm backing up now. Let's take a look at the end of the gun." The tank slowly retreated from the fluttering black curtain. Both men gasped when they noticed the shimmering on the front part of the gun. Durant whistled. "Good God, that looks like ice." Hugely nodded. "I think it is ice. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to study it much, though. I can see it disappearing as we speak." Durant jotted down some notes. "Interesting it's colder in there than it is out here. That's a useful thing to know, sir. It's good we brought that thermometer. May I proceed with the experiment?" Hugely nodded. "Go ahead. Take her in the rest of the way." Durant didn't need to be told twice. He pressed some more buttons, and the little tank resumed its trip forwards. 10 inches. 9, 8, 7. The gun is almost completely immersed now, and I can't see it on the monitor anymore. 6, 5, 4, sir. We're starting to get a bit of resistance in the model's treads. I think they may be starting to freeze up as they're starting to enter the death gate." Hugely spoke urgently. "We need to get in there before the thing stops moving. Damn Muggle contraptions. Hurry." Durant pressed the accelerator, and the little tank slowly forced its way forwards. 3-2. Hugely looked at the screen. The fluttering curtain seemed the same as it had before. Or was it? Was he imagining something, or were spots starting to appear in the distance beyond the veil? The folds in the curtain were growing rapidly now from the perspective of the camera. Durant pushed the stop button in excitement. "Contact! What the—" Durant stared at the screen and then at Hugely. Both men were struck speechless. The filmy curtain had vanished, parting to reveal an almost featureless void. The only things he could see were what appeared to be faint grey dots, slowly moving around. Several of them appeared to be heading towards the camera. The image began to warp and shimmer as the objects approached. It was as if, of course, Hugely thought bitterly. The camera lens was likely starting to ice over. The device didn't have much time left. Hugely turned to Durant. "Pull it back, Michael. Pull." Durant shook his head. "I want to see what wow." One of the objects had approached within a few feet of the camera. Both men gasped when they realized what the object was. It was a spirit, a ghost in Sheol, its natural habitat. It was almost unrecognizable because it wasn't glowing. As the image on the camera faded, the two men heard the object speak 3 unmistakable words in a decidedly feminine voice. It was an obvious question. "Appear upon Inai." Hugely was suddenly distracted by motion in the death chamber. Horrified, he watched as the electrical cord connecting the electrical generator and the probe suddenly jumped into the air and lurched forward as if the spirit on the other side had tried to pick it up. A portion of it fell into the protective ring of fire, and the wire snapped in two. The controls and camera went dead as the far end of the cord was suddenly yanked into the death gate. There was a bit of a commotion on the other side of the death gate for a few minutes. The curtain fluttered wildly. Durant's wand pointed at the death gate, ready to slam the door shut if anything came through. Eventually, the disturbance abated, and the curtain began moving around lazily once more. They waited a couple of minutes, but it soon became obvious the show was over. Hugely closed the death gate, and the alarms and rings of fire vanished. The two men stared at each other. Finally, Hugely whistled. Good God, we can send messages through, and they can speak to us by inanimate proxy. Do you realize what this implies? Both of them did. They just didn't want to say it. Durant grinned. We've got to do this again, this time with a better probe, and make sure this doesn't leave the Department of Mysteries. Hugely nodded brusquely. I totally agree. There's only one problem I can think of, though, with our communications strategy. Really, what's that? What the hell do those three words mean? Chapter 324, Pissy Pissy Bowing Bowing. Monday, August 19, 1996, Boeing Company Settle, Washington, United States of America. The president of Boeing leaned over the table and brought out an extender bag. Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have a problem. A big one. One of the vice presidents grunted. Let me guess. DeLorean has decided to stay in the flying car business despite our pressure. They can't exactly cancel the project after that demo of the Aviator back at the beginning of the month. Oh, it's worse than DeLorean. It looks like we're about to upstaged by a bunch of witches from Massachusetts, two of whom are probably barely out of college. The vice president chuckled as the president reached into the bag and began pulling something out. I highly doubt that, sir. If all else fails, we can just buy them out and destroy their technology. We're a big company and can easily afford a small startup, even in this economy. The president finished withdrawing the object from the bag, unfolded it, and showed it to the rest of the people in the room. It was a small rug, about 4x6 feet, with pictures of unicorns and other toys on it. Someone had drawn a large square in the center, neatly slicing off a unicorn's horn. There was nervous rustling in the room. Finally, one of the other vice presidents spoke up. Sir, are you sure that's what you wanted to bring out? That looks like a rug from a nursery school or something like that. The president, who had been reading the words on the back, nodded. Looks like an ordinary, albeit childish, rug, doesn't it? Well, it's got a little secret to it. Watch this. He placed the rug on the floor and sat in the square. Somewhat apprehensively, he touched part of it. The rest of the people in the room gasped as the rug began to lift him into the air. Making sure not to hit anyone, he flew around the room, lowered the rug back to the ground again, and got off. He turned around the rug so that the rest of the board members could see the instructions on the back. Ladies and gentlemen, this is problem number 1. A flying carpet. Those two famous witches from Massachusetts have decided to go into business selling flying carpets. They went on sale Wednesday and made the Boston Globe. Someone in the Lexington office thought we ought to know about this, so they bought one and sent it over using next-day shipping. The first vice president chuckled. Don't drink and fly. I like that. Seriously, though, how are these guys going to compete with us? I mean, that rug only supports one person and maxes out at 20 mph. It's not like someone's going to be able to take that from here to Miami. The president nodded. You're right. These flying carpets can't do that. Yet, what I'm concerned about is that once these things start selling, and those two girls are going to get more creative. All they need to do is start enchanting things like blankets, and you've got commuter aids which can enter Cessna's market. I also highly doubt that 20 mph is a real limiting velocity. My guess is that these rugs can go faster, much faster. At the rate things are going, people will be able to have their own airplanes for under $1,000. This little thing cost $400. He paused for effect before continuing. And if Kurchatova and de Mornay don't think about things like this, you can reset assured that copycat artists who are trying to compete in this new market are going to try it. The two witches may have bought themselves some time with the patent office, but inevitably someone else is going to get involved. Another board member looked at him curiously. Bought themselves some time with the copyright office. What do you mean? The president explained. One of the side effects of having a company being founded by two MIT graduates, both graduated this year, is that the founders have access to a lot of very smart classmates. Apparently, someone at Sloan told them to patent the flying carpet before someone else does. They just did that. It's patent 5,547,991. Levitating transport device powered by magic. The first board member whistled. Clever. It's descriptive, yet it's ambiguous enough to cover virtually anyone else's idea. If they've got themselves good lawyers, they could make a killing. Come to think of it, they'll have to show how to make one of them in the patent application. But if no one else can get their hands on a wizard. The president stuffed the rug back in the bag. You see where this is going. Those kids could become a threat at some point. However, Guinevere's flying carpets will have to be placed on the back burner for the time being. We've got an even more pressing threat. The Muggle Apparition Network, founded by Rebecca Richardson of Prescott, Ma. The board members began muttering among themselves. Finally, one of them voiced what all of them were afraid of. Prescott is one of the wizarding towns, right? Are you telling me that this witch is teaching Muggles to apparate? That would be catastrophic. The president nodded. Indeed, it would be. It's actually not that bad, but it's close. Let me explain. Most wizards consider apparition to be similar to Muggle driving. What Richardson has founded is, in effect, a taxi service. The company sends a cab over, lets the people in, drives to the destination, and lets the people off. The first board member shrugged. So, what's the point? Muggles can't apparate. The president came to the punchline. Yes, and the 5-year-old in the back seat of the cab doesn't need to know how to drive in order to reach the destination safely. The only person who knows how to drive is the driver. The board member got it. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that these wizards are able to take Muggles as passengers on their apparitions? Exactly. Supposedly, each wizard can transport 2 passengers through something called side-along apparition. Apparently, all the passengers have to do is tell the wizard where they have to go, grab onto his hand, and he'll apparate over there. The only requirement is that the passenger has to provide the wizard with a photograph of the place they want to go. The wizard has to envision his destination in order to apparate properly. The president continued with the bad news. Man has now provided the Muggles with a way to travel all the way across the United States, virtually instantaneously, for $80 round trip. That is very bad news, and it means we have to think about doing something else. He paused. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about time we started venturing into space travel. Cambridge. Ma, Guinevere apparated into Jason's living room with a frown on her face. Jason, we may have a problem. It looks like some wizards in Prescott have started offering apparition services to Muggles. That's going to compete with us. One of the new company's selling points is that you don't need to buy a $400 carpet to go from one place to another. They can also travel instantaneously all across the country. Jason swore. That's not good. What are we going to do? Guinevere grinned. Simple. We're going to start renting carpets as well as selling them. $39.95 month for a small, $79.95 for a medium, and $139.95 for a large. For short commutes which occur several times a month, we're going to be able to corner the commuter aid part of the market. Sure, the Muggle Apparition Network has monthly passes as well, but they go for almost $700. Atlantis. Dagher looked around at all of the auras in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we have him. We've just received a tip that he's in Ecuador at a birding resort and that he just healed someone who had been bitten by a venomous snake. I want you to confiscate the stone if you can. If you can't, destroy it. Do not kill him unless it is absolutely necessary. Keep in mind that since he has already shown that he is a dark wizard as far as we're concerned, the Aes Sedai restrictions against offensive magic do not apply. One of the auras frowned. He's not in Howinghamland trying to sell the stone to the highest bidder. That's very strange, with all of the mercenaries running around in the center of the country. Dagger shook his head. Apparently not. He must worried that he's going to get an arrow in the chest, a bullet in the head, or an Avada Kedavra before he's able to heal himself with the stone. We should also be thankful that he didn't head off to Nestor or Círdan or somewhere like that where the Muggles wouldn't have been able to go. These may have been mistakes on his part, and we're going to take advantage of them. Go, and may Allah go with you. Chapter 325. Yes, that dress does make you look fat. Tuesday, August 20, 1996, Bella Vista, Cloud Forest Birding Resort. Ecuador. David Hendrickson couldn't understand where all the birds had gone. Normally, the sunrise birdwatching session allowed the guests to point out several different types of birds, parakeets, grey jays, and so forth. Although he had seen a few cowbirds on this morning's hike, there hadn't been much out there. No one else seemed to know why either. Granted, it was still raining, as it had done for the past 3 days. Ever since those idiots in the Pacific had launched a few zillion cubic miles of water into the air, weather patterns around the world had run amok. It would take a long time for all of that liquid to drain out. Perhaps the worst thing of all had been the fact that salt water was falling out of the skies. Large numbers of trees were dying off, and people all over the world were now faced with yet another problem with the environment. Simply reinstalling the protector wouldn't work, as that had the distinct possibility of throwing land into the air or flooding Howiehamland completely. It would do nothing to remove the water already launched. Besides, there wasn't really any government left in Howiehamland responsible for installing the protector. The entire island had fallen into chaos, with various warring factions and mercenaries running everywhere, not to mention Christian missionaries who were having a field day with the human population. The rainforest here still seemed pretty normal. Granted, you could lose a bunch of trees in a forest this dense and not see any changes. The only signs the climate was changing was the fact that several animals seemed to be trying to flee their burrows and move somewhere else. Taking an awful gamble, he had brought out the philosopher's stone after someone had been bitten by a newly emerged venomous snake and saved the woman's life. Granted, he had been forced to obliviate everyone around him and make them think that the woman had cut herself by falling on a splinter. Although this was certainly a case where the stone was not being abused, a woman have died. After all, he didn't like using it in public like this. It was obvious that he'd managed to escape. He had nearly thrown a fit when word had leaked out that the entire 2nd Division of the Wizards' Standing Army, led by the famous Albus Dumbledore himself, had been ordered to track him down. There were unconfirmed rumors that Dumbledore's army was focusing on Howiehamland, a tactic which made sense if Atlantis considered him a mercenary who would be trying to unload the stone in order to elude the pursuit. Hendrickson wasn't a mercenary anymore, however. He realized that the stone was dangerous and was determined to keep it away from governments and politicians who would abuse it themselves. Wondering where all the birds had gone, he followed the birding party back into the main treehouse, where the senior staff had prepared breakfast. Everyone sat down to discuss their plans for the day. Hendrickson took one sip of the juice and frowned at the taste. He called one of the staff members over and asked him what it was, and he said that it was a rare fruit only found in the forest around Bella Vista. This brought a lot of cheers from the crowd, cheers which vanished abruptly when the staff member tried to pronounce its name and failed miserably. The breakfast continued, and several people said they didn't feel well. The staff members eventually took away the juice and replaced it with water. The water, thankfully, tasted the way water should have. At the table next to him, an old woman showed her blouse off to her husband and asked him if she looked fat. The man hesitated for a moment and then said yes. She glared at him for a minute but didn't say anything. Meanwhile, a couple a few tables away got into a fight when one of them let slip that one of them was having an affair. The jilted partner suddenly said she'd married him for the money, and fights broke out there as well. Hendrickson frowned. This didn't seem right. It almost seemed as if everyone was being forced to tell the truth. His eyes widened when he recalled the strange taste in the juice, and the fact that the staff member obviously didn't know what it was, otherwise he would have been able to pronounce it. It was obvious the juice had been spiked with something that changed the taste. Veritaserum. Hendrickson had to get out of here. He got up and left the room so he could turn on the spot and escape. He climbed the hollowed-out trunk of the tree leading to his room so he could apparate out of there. The apparition was blocked. He tried another destination, only to find that it didn't work either. Meanwhile, couples downstairs were continuing to argue with each other. Hendrickson couldn't believe what was coming out under the Veritaserum. He had a problem. Thank God the stone was for Deliest. A booming voice, obviously sonorous, suddenly overwhelmed the fighting couples. "Attention, please. I'm Wizard Felipe Negret from the Ecuador Ministry of Magic. I'm looking for someone named David Hendrickson. Is he here?" Hendrickson didn't dare breathe as the people downstairs said they didn't recognize the name. That made sense. Of course, he'd been going under Harley Lamar ever since he'd gotten here. Negret continued. "All right, let's try something else. Did anyone here get bitten by a snake recently?" More no's. Thank God for that obliviation, Hendrickson thought. Okay, I'll try describing him. He's about 190 cm tall, weighs 100 kilos. Hendrickson swore as one of the other guests began to speak. "Possibly, Senor Negret, I know a man who looks like that, but his name is Harley Lamar. He was here a minute ago. I think he went upstairs." Hendrickson winced. He was in big trouble. He couldn't fly away as he had hidden his broom in a different room. He couldn't apparate. Hell, he couldn't even run away as the only way out of the tree house was down the trunk into the breakfast room. Someone downstairs shouted, "Revelio hominum," and Hendrickson winced as he felt the chill of the spell detecting him. Seconds later, he heard people making their way up the ladder leading to the upper levels of the tree house. Hendrickson considered hiding in the bathroom, but ruled that out quickly because that would be the obvious place they'd check, since they'd already tracked him down to this room. He'd have to make his stand here. 3 men made their way into the room and pointed their wands at him. "Are you David Hendrickson?" Hendrickson wanted to say no, but the Veritaserum wouldn't let him. "Yes." "Do you have the stone on you?" Once again, Hendrickson's mouth had a mind of its own. "Yes." "Give it to me, Senor Hendrickson, or I will be required to take it by force." Hendrickson shook his head. "I can't. It's Fidelius to me, and I'm not willing to give it up until I'm sure that your ministry will not abuse it." The wizard stared at him in disbelief for a moment. Then someone remembered that he was under Veritaserum and had to be telling the truth. They talked quickly among each other for a few minutes. Hendrickson knew enough Spanish to realize that he had caught them off guard. The lead wizard spoke again. "Tell me why you stole the stone." Hendrickson didn't need to worry here. "Originally, I did it for profit. However, when Dr. Flamel's warning came out, I realized that it was too dangerous a magical object to allow in society. I originally intended to destroy the stone, but then I realized that if I could discipline myself to only use it for good purposes, it would be better than not having it at all." The wizard shook his head. "Senor Hendrickson, it is the belief of Grand Mugwump Dagher and Dr. Flamel that no human being can be entrusted with the stone, with the possibly exception of the people who work in the Department of Mysteries. I do not think you are qualified to be the stone's keeper. Tell me what you've done with it so far, and don't keep me waiting long enough for the Veritaserum to wear off." Hendrickson was happy to oblige. "Well, I saved a woman's life after she was hit by a car. I healed someone who had broken her leg. I cured a person here from a snake bite." As he ran down the list, his interrogator's eyes widened. Finally, he reached the end, and the wizard resumed his investigation. "Did you ever use the philosopher's stone to benefit yourself in ways which were unnatural? Were you tempted to, Senor Hendrickson?" The wizard thought for a moment. Here is what we will do. I am willing to take an unbreakable vow to say my mission is to return the stone to Atlantis, where it will be confiscated and studied by the Department of Mysteries, there possibly under the tutelage of Nicholas Flamel, if he has the time. You are familiar with the Department of Mysteries, Senna Hendrickson. You are aware that they are capable of keeping secrets and are sworn to never reveal what they discover. In return, you give me the stone. It will be safe with us. Safer, in fact, than it would have likely been with you. But I didn't do anything wrong with it once I changed my ways. The wizard shook his head gravely. In time, you would have. You were tempted, and unless I'm badly mistaken, you used it more and more often as time went by. Is that true? Hendrickson got the point, and he hung his head. Yes. The wizard put his hand on Hendrickson's shoulder. It is a slippery slope, Senna Hendrickson. Even Nicholas Flamel himself abused it at the beginning. It is for the best, my friend. I urge you to give it up now, before your self-restraint weakens to the point which could push you over to the dark side. Hendrickson stared at the wizard for a long time. Finally, he shrugged, removed the Fidelius from the stone, and handed it over. The wizard handed it to one of his subordinates, who turned and left the room. Hendrickson had one last question. What happens to me now? Are you going to execute me? The wizard shook his head slowly. Originally, we had considered it. However, it is obvious, especially with the Veritaserum, that you handled the situation better than any of us could have expected. Gracias a Dios that we reached you before you were corrupted. The only thing that will happen to you now is that you will be obliviated to remove any knowledge of the stone. In addition, you will be fined 10,000 galleons for stealing valuable property from Herald Green Pharmaceutical Corporation. This fine will be reduced by 1,000 galleons by every life saved by the stone. Hendrickson thought about it. That's only 4,000 galleons now. A lot, but not insurmountable. How long do I have to pay it? 10 years, Senna Hendrickson. I trust that will be enough time for you. Hendrickson nodded. I think so, so thank you for your mercy. The wizard shook his hand and prepared to take his leave. You are a good man, Senna Hendrickson. Make sure you stay good, and who knows? Perhaps the Ministry of Magic would be willing to pay part of this in gratitude. Now, if you would excuse us, we have several other guests here who need their memories obliviated. Omega Institutor Heimbeck, United States of America. Samuel watched as John Paul hurried into the conference bunkhouse. The leader of the Christian sect had a worried expression on his face. Holy One, an issue has come up in South America. Samuel frowned. South America, where is that? It's a large landmass due south of here, in the southern hemisphere. There are several countries down there, most of which speak Spanish. One of these Spanish-speaking countries has done something rather rash, and I need your advice as to what to do. Really, what happened? To make a long story short, they're preaching Christianity to the inhabitants of Howienhamland. Samuel scratched his beard. I see how that can be a problem, John Paul. They're supposed to be preaching the unified Abrahamic traditions, not those of your sect. John Paul rolled his eyes. Ah, that's not it, Holy One. For one thing, I did not authorize this mission. For another, various organizations, including the United Nations and the Society for the Preservation of Intelligent Welfare, are advocating that we not interfere with Howienham religious practices, at least until we are able to study them more. Howienham, is that the religion of the native population we are trying to convert? John Paul had a bad feeling about this. No, Holy One. Howienhamland is a large island off the coast of South America. It has about 1 million inhabitants, most of whom are either centaurs or humans. There is currently a war between the centaurs and the humans on this island. Samuel stared at him blankly. Centaurs, what are they? Sentient beings which are half man, half horse. Samuel nodded in recognition. Ah, horse people. I have heard about the horse people, though I have never met any. What is the war about? The centaurs subjugated the humans for a long time, and now that the statute of secrecy is down, the humans convinced some of the Muggles to help overthrow the centaur leadership. It's really ugly down there, Holy One. Both sides are committing atrocities left and right. Samuel nodded. Sounds like a mission to provide spiritual guidance is warranted. The question now becomes whether our missionaries should uproot their religion and introduce them to the God of Abraham. You may recall that I and my predecessors spent a lifetime trying to wean the Israelites off worship of idols and corporeal gods like Baal and Asherah. It didn't work perfectly, but it was a start. John Paul shook his head. I would strongly advise against destroying their existing traditions. The Muggles have just found out about this new culture, and it may make sense for us to study it more before intervening with it. Besides, there's a war going on there. People who find it difficult to switch to our traditions may be going through troubled times there, and will need to fall back upon their old ones for comfort. These aren't Malech worshippers or Amalecites, Holy One. Samuel thought some more. How close are the Houyhnhnm beliefs to those of the God of Abraham? John Paul hesitated. He had been afraid of a question like this. We know little about their traditions, Holy One. From what we know, they worship the 5 gods of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. Are these gods seen as aspects of one abstract principle? You see where I'm going with this? I do, Holy One. Unfortunately, all I know is what I hear from Father Neru Martinez, the man who took it upon himself to minister to the Houyhnhnms. What has Father Martinez discovered so far? John Paul really didn't want to say this, but he had no choice. Well, they have holy lakes, holy mountains, holy fires, and so forth. They've got rituals centered around these sources which they use to try to calm and guide them. Samuel frowned. Has Father Martinez determined if they actually worship earth, air, and so forth, hoping that these elements will save them? If so, they are using these elements as idols. That is wrong, and they should stop doing that. John Paul raised his hands in supplication. Holy One, these aren't Malech worshippers. They had a very stable civilization, and Samuel shook his head. The horse people subjugated humans, did they not? That is not a sign of a healthy civilization, where there should not be upper and lower classes. You know how I preached against the Israelites having a king until I realized there wasn't much I could do about it. John Paul nodded. I do, Holy One. Samuel began pacing around the room. Good. At any rate, I believe the subjugation of the humans is because their spiritual practices need modification. Here is what we'll do. Can you summon this Father Martinez to Omega? He'll give us his latest report on what he's seen so far. Based on this information, we will determine if the Houyhnhnm spiritual practices are viable. If they are, we will instruct Martinez to return with medical support and non-denominational motivation, much like Dalai Lama does. John Paul winced, but had to ask, and what happens if the committees here don't find their religious practices to be viable? Samuel shrugged. Then we fall back on the common practices from my time. Tell Father Martinez to knock down their idols and convince them do what we do. What's wrong with that? John Paul closed his eyes in horror. Plenty, he thought, plenty. Chapter 326. A Wand Fit for a King. Wednesday, August 21, 1996. Vertic Allehogsmead United Kingdom Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Severus Snape. Dear Mr. Windsor, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term starts on September 2. Yours sincerely. Phileas Flitwick Deputy, Headmaster Uniform. First-year students will require 1. 3 sets of plain work robes, black. 2. 1 plain pointed hat, black, for day wear. 3. 1 set of dress Muggle clothing. Note, new requirement. 4. 1 pair of protective gloves, dragon hide or similar. King William looked at Hermione. Where are we? And how did Minister Flamel get us over here by grabbing onto his hands. Flamel, whose workload had finally lightened a little with the capture of the final stone, explained, "Your Majesty, we've traveled from Windsor Castle via apparition. Wizards use it to teleport instantaneously from place to place." William whistled. "That's really cool. Hermione, do you know how to do it?" Hermione shook her head. "No, Your Majesty. You need to be 17 to get a license." "Will I be able to learn?" Hermione and Flamel looked at each other and then back at William. Flamel hesitated before responding. "I've been around a long time, Your Majesty, but I've never seen anything like this before. To be honest, no one has never tried teaching a half-wizard to cast spells for the simple reason that prior wizarding tests would have passed you off as a muggle. There could be things which we can do which you can't. For all we know, you can apparate forwards but not backwards. We're in completely unexplored territory here, Your Majesty. Hopefully, we'll have everything sorted out by the time you turn 17. William nodded and looked at the storefronts. "I've never heard of these stores. Gregorovich's Fine Wands, Britain Office, Petunia's Potions, Zonko's Second Joke Shop. Is this the wizarding version of a strip mall?" Both Flamel and Hermione laughed. "Believe it or not, Your Majesty, you're not that far off. There were 3 major shopping areas in wizarding Britain: Vertic Alley here in Hogsmeade, Horizont Alley in Manchester, and Diagon Alley in London. Of these 3 areas, Diagon Alley was by far the most upscale and the most famous. However, Voldemort's nuclear bomb took care of that. This has forced students to get their Hogwarts school supplies at Vertic Alley or Horizont Alley." William chuckled. "Let me guess, someone's going to make a Kirsty Alley next." Flamel looked him in confusion, and Hermione was forced to explain. "Dr. Flamel, Kirsty Alley is a Muggle actress. You probably weren't familiar with her. And Your Majesty, I highly doubt that they would make a Kirsty Alley. It would come across as too much of a joke, especially with the statute of secrecy down now." William nodded and looked around the area. "You think you're going to be able to find all this equipment in here, even the stuff about the toad and so forth? I don't know about you, Hermione, but I don't fancy the idea of carrying around a toad the whole time." Hermione smiled. "You don't have to, Your Majesty. I've spoken with Professor, now Headmaster Snape, and he has agreed to let you keep Silver Moth as your familiar if you want her." "Familiar? You mean like a companion animal or pet for a wizard?" Hermione showed him the cage containing the dwarf hippogriff. "Yes, Your Majesty. We've got Silver Moth here in this cage. She comes from Lilliput, a land filled with fairies and small creatures. All of the Gulliver's Travels islands exist, including poor Howiehamland, which is currently in the middle of a disastrous civil war. If you wish, you can keep her as your familiar." William looked at the hippogriff in shock. "What is this, a bird or a horse? I've never seen anything like this before." Flamel answered the question. "Both, Your Majesty. It's an extremely rare species, especially in its dwarf form. If I were you, I'd keep her just to be different. Remember that once you set foot in those doors, you will no longer be king. You will be Mr. Windsor, first-year student. If you want to stand out at all, this animal could help." Hermione nodded and continued. "An animal like this can also be useful for delivering letters to and from home. First-year students are not allowed off the Hogwarts campus, though they may make an exception for you because of your age. Flying creatures are extremely desirable in that regard, and that's why many people use owls." "Why do you have a cat, then?" Hermione shrugged. "I like cats." William grinned at her. "I like you." Flamel coughed and looked around nervously. Your Majesty, we're in a bit of a hurry, so let's head into Gregorovich's London office and get you a wand. Normally, we'd have gone to Ollivanders in Diagon Alley, but that option is no longer available. We'll get you a wand fit for a king." William frowned. "I've already got a wand. Besides, shouldn't I have a wand by some British chap if I'm going to be king?" Hermione chuckled. "You can use the wand you got from Ziggurat, Your Majesty. However, wands are somewhat alive in that they can choose to serve a particular wizard. If you want to get the most from your wand, you're going to want to find one which likes you. As far as this particular wand maker goes, Gregorovich makes extremely high-quality wands. If it's any consolation, one of the best Quidditch players in the world used a Gregorovich wand. I met him personally, and he died a hero's death in Korea fighting Voldemort. Voldemort was the bad wizard who tried to become prime minister, right? Hermione nodded. That's right. Cool. Oh, and what's Quidditch? Hermione and Flamel looked at each other. This was going to be harder than they had thought. Miller Household, Kilsyth, England. Isabel Miller was getting angrier and angrier. It was becoming painfully obvious that the wizards weren't planning to change their behavior. Sure, they had instituted oaths which would supposedly prevent abuse of power. However, it was becoming evident that people were just working around the oaths. You can't lie. Just say a half-truth or interpret something differently. You can't use magic as an offensive weapon against anyone who isn't a dark wizard. Convince yourself the opponent is a dark wizard and you can fire whatever you want at him. You're forced to follow the laws of the land. That doesn't prevent you from going out of your way to interpret the laws the wrong way or lynch someone in vigilante justice. Sure, the wizarding authorities were going to provide counseling for wizards, but what good would that do if no one took them up on it? And as far as psychiatric evaluations of new wizards went, those evaluations wouldn't become mandatory until the 1997-1998 school year. Some help those would do now. There were still many wizards who hadn't taken the vows. Even worse, there were stories coming out of that ridiculous Centaur Island where magical mercenaries of all stripes were hiring themselves off to the highest bidder. One of them, a certain Hendrickson, had even stolen the Fountain of Youth or something like that, and the authorities were trying to track him down. Most of the 2nd Division of the Wizarding Standing Army, also known as Dumbledore's Army, had been sent off to Houyhnhnmland to find this fellow Dumbledore, suspected that he may try to offload the loot there. Just what the world needed, she thought. More immortal wizards. Isabel had to admit that the wizards had tried to rein in abuse. However, it was obvious that they had failed. Voldemort may have been killed, but who else was waiting in the wings? It was looking increasingly like the wizards were refusing to adhere to the terms of the Britain for Humans ceasefire. Isabel vowed to herself that if things didn't improve within a couple of months, she and her colleagues would take action to make them improve. Chapter 327, Carpetbagger. Thursday, August 22, 1996. Culgen Oriental Rug Gallery Brookline, next up. Lawyer Apparition Network. How convenient, Jason thought. This place was on the sea line, and he could get there without having to even worry about buying a car. It would be a bit of a pain to lug all of the rugs home on the subway, though. It was a pity that the two girls couldn't just come over, enchant the rugs there, and fly them off. He opened the door and started looking around the room. This supplier would work out pretty well, he thought. They looked much fancier than the stupid bed and bath rugs that they'd been sending to Crate and Barrel. And although the rugs at Crate and Barrel had been selling, the idea of grown men riding around on fluffy pink carpets with unicorns and dolls on them had nearly dissuaded a few of the customers. He liked the fact that most of these rugs had designated border areas where the patterns were different and which were separated from the main body of the rug by a distinct divider. It looked like the two girls wouldn't have to draw squares on these. Here, form provided for function. One of the salespeople came up to him. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I help you?" Jason nodded. "I hope so. I'm looking to buy 6 rugs, 3 small, 2 medium, and 1 large. What would you recommend?" The salesman brought out a sheet of paper. "We'll start with the large one. By large, you mean something like a 9x12. Yeah, that's just the right size." "Splendid. Which room are you decorating for, sir?" Jason chuckled. "We're not decorating for a room, sir, though I suppose that the rugs can be used indoors as well. If things go as planned, these rugs are going airborne. The salesman stared at him. Good grief, you must be involved with Guinevere's flying carpets. Jason nodded. Yup, I'm Jason Morgenstern. Guinevere de Mornay is my girlfriend, and I'm rounding up some more carpets. This time, we're going oriental so we can get fancier stuff and increase our variety. The salesman thought for a moment. This could benefit both of us, Mr. Morgenstern. I must say that as soon as you people introduced that store in Newton, part of the store's customer base defected over to you. If you start enchanting our carpets, and we have the owner set up a contract making sure that keep on funneling you rugs, we can both make a tidy profit on this. Jason nodded. That's exactly what we're thinking, sir. A flying oriental rug will likely go for 2 or 3 times the price of a boring bed and bath one. We're figuring that a rental of a normal small rug will go for $40 a month, and a small oriental rug will go for $90 a month. You pay for the quality and design, after all. The salesman nodded. These rugs aren't cheap, you know. A high-quality 9x12 can go for $1,000 or more. Jason shrugged. A rental of a large flying oriental rug will probably go for $399 a month or so, and it will probably cost $5,000 or more to buy. Trust me, all we need is to sell one of these things, and we'll have more than enough money to buy more. The salesman frowned. $5,000. You're sure those will sell? We're talking around the price of a used car here, and a car can go much faster than 20 mph. I hope so, sir. The rugs won't have to deal with traffic jams or gas, for one thing. What if stops working in midair? What happens if someone falls off? You're taking an awful risk, Mr. Morgenstern. Guinevere claims that they've planned for that in their next model. Although she and Jelena don't think it will ever be necessary. They're thinking of attaching an emergency parachute on the bottom, which will be triggered automatically a few seconds after the flight enchantment falls apart. The salesman still wasn't convinced. I must say, if I already had a car, I wouldn't be willing to spend $5,000 on a flying carpet just to get off the ground. You don't have to, sir. If all else fails and none of the big Orientals fly, we'll stop buying them. We'll still get some of the smaller ones from you. The salesman hesitated before continuing. May I ask which other companies you've spoken with to get rugs from? Jason shrugged. You can, but I wouldn't be allowed to answer. Fair enough. You're going to put the instructions on the bottom as usual. Yup, there's plenty of space down there, especially with the big ones. The salesman thought for a moment. Mr. Morgenstern, I've got a couple of ideas. I'll have to discuss these with my manager, but I want to see what you think of it. Most of the people are going to be looking at these rugs from the ground, right? So they'll only see the bottom while they're flying. Jason nodded. That's correct. The salesman grinned. I wouldn't suppose it would be possible for you guys to put Caljan Oriental Rug Gallery on the bottom in large letters. Jason's eyes widened. I never thought of that. You want to turn them into flying billboards and advertisements. The salesman's grin widened. The customer doesn't care about the bottom, does he? When he's flying it or is walking on it in his house, he's only going to be looking at the top. Jason considered this. I'll have to talk with the girls, but that actually isn't a bad idea. We probably get a discount on the rugs in exchange for advertising space. The net result is that you get more business and we make more money. The salesman nodded. It's a win-win situation, don't you think? Definitely. What's your other idea? The salesman looked at him hopefully. Can we sell of them in this store once you've enchanted them? We get an unusual product, you get another distributor, and you get extra space for some overstock. You'll get a part of the proceeds, of course. Jason took out a pad of paper and started jotting down notes. I like that as well, sir. You talk to your manager, and I'll talk to the 2 witches. If we both agree, we'll set up an arrangement. In the meantime, how much does this red one cost? Chapter 328, Lawyer Apparition Network. Friday, August 23, 1996, Fourth Mesa Sanders looked at Strong Bear and frowned. I didn't think pregnant women were allowed to apparate. Wasn't it considered a high-risk proposition? His wife grunted, and he turned to look at her. She was almost 8 months along now, and she looked very large. He couldn't imagine that she still had a month to go. Melissa looked down at her grossly distended belly and chuckled. Dave, at this point in the pregnancy, walking is a high-risk proposition in all likelihood, let alone apparating. They've even gotten to the point where they're not going to let me flew in soon. Strong Bear nodded and turned to Sanders. We generally discourage use of the flu network for women who are 8 months along or more. We're concerned that the stress and confusion associated with the flu network could force the mother to have a premature delivery. At any rate, back to the issue at hand. The Muggle Apparition Network has gotten a lot of press over the last few days, and there are people lining up to apparate. The Muggle news reporters have been claiming that Rebecca Richardson's Muggle phone lines have been off the hook for people waiting transport. She's been forced to recruit more wizards to help chauffeur people around, and apparently she's up to 25 employees now. The problem is, of course, that they have no idea what they're doing and are throwing pregnant women around. I'd hate to be man's lawyers when those women start suing man for causing miscarriages. Don't the wizards realize that pregnant women can't apparate? The woman in charge is a witch, after all, and she's old enough to have had children. Surely she must know about this. Strong Bear made a sour face. The issue appears to be that some of the other man employees, particularly single men who need money, are apparating women unless the passengers are visibly pregnant. This is highly discouraged, Dave. The wizarding journals all agree that women can lose fetuses as early as the end of the first trimester. The odds that a 3-month fetus will be lost is roughly 3% per apparition, and the odds increase after that. Can man buy some of those flying carpets and start shuttling pregnant women around that way? In theory, yes. In practice, man is aware that Guinevere's flying carpets is likely to be their biggest competitor and doesn't want to do anything to support them. Sanders pointed at his wife. Do you think she would have lost the baby had she been apparating over here the whole time? Strong Bear nodded. It's quite likely, though thankfully there's no way to tell for sure. Melissa shuddered at this. Strong Bear, what are you going to do about this? Someone's got to tell man to stop doing this, at the very least for their own good. Strong Bear smiled. I've got 2 bear working on that right now. He's going to talk to Ariadne, Guinevere, and WSC. Hopefully one of those 3 will get them to listen to reason. Department of Health and Human Service, Washington, D.C. The head of the Department of Health and Human Services blinked and stared at his secretary. You've got Persephone Ariadne on line 2, the Secretary of Magic. The secret nodded. That's correct, sir. What the hell does she need us for? She claims it involves the Muggle Apparition Network. She wants you to warn the nation that pregnant women should not be apparating. The department head whistled. Patch her through. The secretary nodded and sent the call in. She returned to her desk as Health and Human Services picked the phone up. Hello. Ariadne's distinctive voice was clear on the other end. Is this the Secretary of Health and Human Services? It is, Madame Secretary. I've been told you're concerned about pregnant women apparating, and that man may be getting itself into trouble. Precisely, sir. Although Rebecca Richardson has supposedly told her employees to not serve pregnant women, there have been many, many cases of people who are not obviously pregnant being transported. You need to warn Muggles that women can lose their babies during apparition, even if they aren't showing yet. Health and Human Services frowned. Can't they just check if the girl's pregnant before sending her through? In theory, yes. Unfortunately, you have to keep in mind that the apparators go to the customer's house to transport them and don't have all of the specialized healers and spells at their disposal to check if a woman is pregnant. Furthermore, you have to understand that most of the people involved in Man lost their jobs when WSC banned them from taking Muggle positions. Wizarding healers would not have lost their jobs in this manner, so they would be extremely unlikely to be involved with Man. What are the odds that a pregnant woman will lose the baby? Considerable, sir. It's about 3% per apparition for a 3-month fetus, 5% for a 4-month fetus, and 11% for a 5-month fetus. It gets worse after that, but by this point, the woman is obviously pregnant and won't be transported. It may seem low, but you have also considered that if the woman is apparating out, she's going to have to apparate back. That makes the risk of a miscarriage 6% or more. The Secretary of Health and Human Services jotted down some notes. I'll issue a statement, Madame Secretary. Thanks for the tip. Boeing headquarters, the president of Boeing chuckled. Here, Mr. Parker, look at this. Looks like the Department of Health and Human Services is suing Muggle Apparition Network. It seems that the government wants them to shut down until they figure out how to transport pregnant women safely or find a reasonable alternative for transporting pregnant women. Quentin Parker, the company lawyer, chuckled. It sounds Clinton and his friends are getting involved as well. Has anyone else taken advantage of this and started supporting the government in this noble effort? The president handed over a list. A few: McDonnell Douglas, Airbus, the FAR, Cessna, GM, Ford, Amtrak. Parker whistled. Looks like Man has made itself a lot of enemies. Sure, we'll join the party. There's no way they're going to win this, sir. No way. The president grinned. That's good to hear. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to organizing the new spacecraft development department. Even if the government does take Man down, we'll still have the flying carpet kids to deal with. Besides, if we hire a wizard, I suspect space travel is going to become much, much easier. Chapter 329. Mir gets booted. Friday, August 23, 1996, Mir Space Station cosmonaut Valery Corzin was minding his own business, looking out the window, when something hit him in the head. He had just drawn a deep breath to yell at his fellow crew members when he saw that none of them were in sight. The module he was in wasn't supposed to have anything substantial floating around in it. Usually, things were tied down to make sure they didn't fly around in microgravity. Occasionally, though, something came loose and started meandering through the station. These objects occasionally made a mess of the modules and in some cases became serious obstacles. However, for the most part, the projectiles were lightweight and or caught very quickly. It didn't take a long time to figure out what hit him. It appeared to be an old sneaker, an American Nike brand. He frowned and looked down at his work boots. Who on earth had come up in sneakers? He certainly hadn't. There were 2 other cosmonauts on board, including a few Americans and a French woman. Alexander didn't seem to be the type to bring sneakers on board. It must have been one of the Westerners. Hating to think how much fuel and money it took to send this stupid shoe up to Earth orbit, he grabbed the intrusive footwear and swam through into the next module, where Alexander was working. He tapped the second cosmonaut on the shoulder with the shoe to get his attention. Corzin held the shoe up. Alexander, whose shoe is this? It got loose in my module. Alexander frowned. I don't think I've seen anyone wearing sneakers up here. How the hell else did it get up here? Beats me, Valery. Could it have been on one of the Americans? What about the French astronaut? Nike is a Western brand after all. Corzin looked at the living module and fumed. Let's find out. I need to remind these newcomers that they shouldn't let things float around like that. The 2 Russians made the rounds of the space station and interviewed each of the other astronauts. To their absolute amazement, none of them recognized the shoe. All of them were wearing the appropriate work boots as well. Corzin growled. Someone's lying. Look everywhere for the matching sneaker and tell that practical joker to behave or we'll send him out the airlock. The space station wasn't that big, and an hour later it was fairly obvious that there was no matching footwear anywhere on board. What was even more amazing is that no one had seen the sneaker before. Every single crew member looked surprised, and Corzin could tell immediately that they were sincere. None of them had brought the shoe up. But if they didn't, who did? Did someone from an earlier crew leave it here? Unlikely, he thought. The people up here are smart enough not to go back with one shoe off, let alone wearing sneakers. Corzin stared at the shoe in disbelief. He was going to get to the bottom of this as soon as possible. He couldn't imagine someone trying to send some kind of bomb into the space station. It's not like the attacker could occupy it easily, but the entire incident unnerved him a bit. Extremely suspicious, he told everyone to take off their work boots and see if the shoe fit any of them. As the rest of the astronauts were taking their shoes off, he reached into the sneaker to take out anything else which had floated in there. There was a small piece of paper folded neatly inside the sneaker, taped to the sole. Wondering whose notes it was, he unfolded it and saw that it was in Russian and English. His eyes widened when he saw the message. To the astronauts of Mir, greetings from Witch Linda Warren. I am performing a magical experiment and have used magic to send this old shoe to the space station. If you receive this message, please slide a pen into the shoelaces or tape a piece of scrap paper to the sole of the shoe where this message was. 10 seconds later, if everything goes as planned, the shoe will disappear and return to Earth. I apologize for the surprise and inconvenience. Sincerely, Linda Warren, Jacksonville, North Carolina. There was silence for a good half-minute. Then one of the American astronauts swore, "This has got to be a joke, and I know it ain't me." Another stared out the window skeptically. "I'm not sure, Will. The wizards are capable of doing some rather strange things. Why, I've heard that they've got flying carpets and stuff now." The first American chuckled. "I'll believe that when I see it." Corzin was losing his patience. Hitting the American on the head lightly with the shoe, he held it up to the crowd. "All right, here's what we'll do. Someone get me a pen and a piece of paper. I'm going to do exactly what this Warren witch wants. Write a scathing message telling her not to mess with space missions, stick the pen in the shoelaces, and tape the message to the sole. What do you think of that?" The first American grinned. "You're calling her bluff, heh? I'd like to see that." Alexander grinned. "So would I. All right, let's do it." Corzin laughed and wrote out the memo. He attached it to the insole and stuck the pen in the shoelaces. "All right, in 4 seconds we'll know if this is a joke." "Aye." His mouth slammed shut as the shoe disappeared in a burst of light. Seconds later, the module was empty once more. The shoe had gone as quickly as it had come, and it had managed to leave the spacecraft without compromising the hull. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, one of the American astronauts spoke up. "I think NASA may have a problem. Hogsmeade, Dumbledore's army had returned home." People cheered and waved congratulatory banners as the second division of the Wizards' standing army returned to civilian life. Although they had not actually been involved in the capture of Hendrickson, they had visited a foreign country and in some cases put themselves in danger in their attempt to track down the Philosopher's Stone. Albus Dumbledore took the podium and announced that he would be returning to Hogwarts in a couple of days. Snape, who had expected this, agreed to step down as headmaster and resume his potions duties. The gaping hole at Potions Master had been filled just in time for the school year, which started in 10 days. The crowd cheered as the rest of the Hogwarts staff welcomed him back. Everyone seemed happy to see him. Snape briefed him on the most recent developments at the school. Dumbledore's eyes widened when he heard that King William had been admitted. He tried to talk Snape out of it, but Snape confessed that it would likely be too late to call off the king now. Besides, there were 2 people who would be willing to help him out if necessary, one of whom was a Q-only wizard. As the group prepared to return to Hogwarts, he saw Professor Baldwin, the Muggle graduate student, walking towards him with a somewhat dazed expression on her face. Wondering what was wrong with her, he asked her what was wrong. She looked woodenly down at the ground. I'm sorry to do this to you, but a family emergency has come up, and I'm going to have to return to Oxford. I'm sorry, headmaster. I'm not going to be able to teach this semester. Hopefully, I'll be able to come back next semester." Dumbledore froze, just his luck. The rest of the Hogwarts staff seemed equally surprised. He had to say something, however. "Is there anything I can do?" "Unfortunately, no. I appreciate your offer, though." Dumbledore didn't know what to say. He just shook her hand and spoke somewhat awkwardly. "We'll hold on to your position for the spring of 1997. In the meantime, see what you can do to find a graduate student who'll be willing to take over for the fall semester." "Do you think you'll be able to do that?" Baldwin nodded. "I think so. I hope I was a good professor. I must say, it felt weird being a student and professor at the same time." Dumbledore smiled. "You were indeed a good professor, Miss Baldwin. You will be welcome back at any time." Baldwin nodded, shook everyone's hand, and walked away. Once again, the Hogwarts staff was short one instructor. Dumbledore had a week and a half to find a replacement. This was not going to be easy. Chapter 330, The Mole. Saturday, August 24, 1996, Headmaster's Tower Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry United Kingdom. The door to Dumbledore's office opened, revealing Professor Flitwick, an 30-something man he had never seen before. Flitwick looked relieved and cautiously optimistic. Flitwick indicated the new man. "Headmaster, I'd like to introduce you to Yevgeny Romanovich Zyganov, a possible new Muggle studies teacher." By sheer luck, he happened to be visiting Hogsmeade for a job interview at the time Baldwin left. Once he heard about what happened, he contacted me. "Mr. Zyganov, this Albus Dumbledore, our headmaster." The newcomer shook Dumbledore's hand. "Pleased to meet you, headmaster." Dumbledore nodded. "Same here, Mr. Zyganov. So tell me about yourself. Have you taught Muggle studies before, and if so, where?" Zyganov shrugged. "I taught biology at a small Muggle school in Odessa for a while, so I have a great deal of experience interacting with Muggles and working with the Muggle world. After several years of pestering by my wife about my ability to see strange things, I took the test and came out as the only wizard. I was intrigued by my wizarding genes and took it upon myself to study about your culture a little. I find it fascinating, headmaster. It's a pity that Voldemort gave wizards such a bad name." Dumbledore nodded gravely. "I can't agree with you more, Mr. Zyganov. Voldemort, or as he was then known, Tom Marvolo Riddle, was actually one of my students for a while. He was a brilliant wizard, and it is a pity he turned to evil. He would have been a great asset to society." Zyganov looked at Dumbledore intently. "I hope I can help in the training of new wizards. After all, I have some wizarding genes and was raised as a Muggle. I figured I'd fit the bill pretty well." Dumbledore thought about it and slowly nodded. "You may very well, Mr. Zyganov. Would you be willing to start in a couple of weeks? The term starts a week from Monday, and we can't hold off Muggle studies for long, especially given the Super Bowl breach." "I will do my best, sir. It may take some time to convince my wife, but growing up in the Ukraine under the Iron Curtain, she always wanted to come to the West. I expect she'll agree." "Does she have a job?" "No, headmaster. She's a housewife." Dumbledore smiled. "It sounds like you are indeed a good candidate, one of the best we've seen so far, in fact. I'll keep you in mind and give you our final decision within 3-5 days. How is that for you?" Zyganov smiled. "I'll be awaiting your decision eagerly, headmaster." "So will I, Mr. Zyganov. Would you like a tour of the school?" Zyganov laughed. "Sure." Zyganov swore under his breath as the naive headmaster showed him around the building. One of the best he'd seen so far. Surely Dumbledore hadn't stumbled across another half-wizard that quickly. Dumbledore must have asked Baldwin to try to recruit another grad student from her school when she left, he thought. It would make sense for him to do so, particularly if Baldwin had done well and the students had bonded with the younger teachers. Besides, a good Muggle studies professor would likely be someone who knew a lot about foreign cultures such as, say, an anthropologist. He kicked himself mentally. When he had caught Baldwin waiting for Dumbledore, called her aside, and imperioused her to make her resign, he should have included a command to not try to recruit any replacements. He hadn't expected any competition here. He had to salvage the situation, he thought. Otherwise, Rasputin would be very displeased. Jacksonville, NC. Dear Ms. Warren, do not do this again, and tell those wand wavers to stop it as well. That damn shoe of yours could have floated into a lever or pushed a button. Hell, for all we know, it could have punctured the hull and depressurized a module. If you are not an astronaut, you do not belong here, and you should not be sending stuff up here. You do realize that we are floating several hundred miles above the Earth, and our only escape is a Soyuz. I'm the captain of this space station, and I am responsible for its crew. Linda winced at the tone. She should have known, she thought. However, the fact that she had gotten the message through meant that the experiment had been a success. As far as she knew, she had been the first witch ever to send a portkey to space, and to send one to an airplane as well. Very interesting. Now that the latest experiment had succeeded, it was time to put her name on the map for good. She looked up at the sky, where the stars were shining brightly. She knew enough about astronomy to realize that trying to send a portkey to the stars would be a fool's errand. Nothing traveled faster than light, and it would take decades or centuries to make it to the stars. However, there was still one option. She looked at the gibbous moon in the sky, and then at the box, which was designed to retrieve dirt and rocks and return them to Earth. Next to the box was the image which inspired her and had helped her set up the spell. The Apollo 11 landing site, complete with the lunar lander and the flag. Hoping that this would work, she touched her wand to the box, and the box disappeared. It would likely take days, if not longer, to make the trip to the moon. She gave it a maybe 50% chance of making it back in one piece. A couple of lights went out, but nothing really major happened to the Muggle environment. There was nothing she could do now but wait southern Houyhnhnmland. The old south-north barge road followed the river Isala through grassy plains, shrubby hills, and then, finally, mountain rainforests. Of course, reaching the rainforest would take another week, even traveling lightly, and in good weather. As it was, rain poured down every day for hours ever since the Protector's end, unnaturally prolonging the wet season. The river, despite its length, wasn't known for its discharge without tributaries. Much of its water was lost on the long way south, at least in dry season. Now, however, the Isala overcame its feeble dams and washed away much of the roads on the river banks, forcing travelers to find other, not as well-built paths. A mixed army, mostly centaurs and humans, along with a few odd creatures and beasts, marched on, struggling in the mud, up north towards the capital. Wizards on carpets and brooms and velas in harpy forms circled over them. A vanguard of heavily armored trolls moved before them, and invisible flying wizards patrolled the forest for miles in both directions, keeping an eye out for any sign of an ambush. For now, that was merely a formality. Apart from a few groups of trees, one could see a day's march ahead on the empty, dull plains. They left Hylanome the day before yesterday, after a day's rest, resupply, and recruitment. The stay in the province's capital was peaceful. By the time they arrived, the governor and a few hundred others had already fled north, and the rest of the city was openly supportive of their case. They spent a day feasting there, while Lord Garham organized a new regional government accepted both by the centaurs and the liberated Yahoos. The army that left was over 5 times bigger than when it arrived. Yahoos and centaurs alike volunteered and offered several caravans worth of supply wagons and the trolls for drawing them. Most of the army was only very hastily trained, but thanks to the recently hired wizards, very well equipped with Geminioed Muggle equipment or enchanted weapons. Groups of Yahoos armed with unfamiliar but powerful assault rifles, all wearing Kevlar vests, marched side by side with centaurs with their trusty bows and arrows magically empowered, the human torso, part of their traditional armor, ditched in favor of Kevlar. The Muggle protective clothes also served as uniforms. All bore the mark of the egalitarian party's militant branch, a single rune in a square. Ook, yes, faction banners will be on the map. Soon. Some of the mercenaries walked with the main army. A few of them were centaurs themselves, recruited from hidden tribes in other lands for their famed skills as archers and trackers. One of them, Zymustus, just noted a peculiar detail in the native armor. "Hey, guys, may I ask a question?" A few of his fellow centaurs measured him up. Kevlar vest like on virtually everyone, but bearing the insignia of the mercenary band, Talison's troll tamers, an ornate composite bow and an enormous bladed weapon visibly enchanted by runes, facial piercings, rippling muscles, and a painted mohawk, a curious mixture of savagery and refinement, but no doubt a formidable warrior. One Millicist, a young stallion, replied cheerfully, "Sure, as long as you two answer one of our questions. So, out with it." Zymustus tentatively began. "I've heard of Houyhnhnm armor, but the descriptions were mostly about the types used in the north, and they said those had spikes on the backs to prevent anything from jumping up there." The boy caught on quickly. "I can guess they also told you some really wind rumors about southern armor, then." "Well, to spare the awkward question, yes." He pointed to his horseback. "These really are saddles for humans." The mercenary cast him an amused glance. "You've gotta be kidding me. You guys let yahoos ride you like a horse. That's scandalous," an older centaur interrupted. "It is, and was, a part of southern military traditions. Before the unification, we had many wars, and our tribes faced rival factions of overwhelming numbers. We let our human vassals to join the fight, but even that wasn't enough. They were even fewer than we were, and only slowed us down. Then one of our ancestors came up with an idea, to make the humans sit on our backs, protecting each other's weak points in melee. But of course, the whole fighting style was forgotten centuries ago. Yet, we can use these saddles to speed up a great number of our infantry. So it's true, then. Strange. It's almost like as if your historians would want to cover it up, Zymustus said. Then again, the north, west, and east had access to much more resources and numbers, yet it really took them a long time to subdue your ancestors here in the plains. I wouldn't be surprised if the whole Yahoo system were forced on you just to keep your auxiliaries from having any weapons skills." All the natives murmured in agreement, and one of them added, "And that's why there are so much of us egalitarians here in the South. Virtually any manor lord or Yahoo owner treats the humans well as much as possible, and the only exceptions are so visibly under northern influence that even the angriest, most abused Yahoo rebel can tell we're on his side." Another finished for him, "And now we march north to show the haughty gold miners how we can get along with the humans peacefully and without slavery." Zymustus, for his own part, had some doubts about the chances of their success in this, or about reaching the capital at all. As they traveled north, they met refugees fleeing south, spreading horrible tales about the fights. Muggle weapons and flyers causing all sort of gruesome injuries and collateral damage. The loyalist remnant lining the northern road with heads on pikes, blood-crazed Yahoos skinning the entire families of their former masters alive. Invisible wizards raining curses on people. If even half of it was true, this would be nastier than the Seared and Nestor war. But as he looked at the cheerful faces of the locals, he remembered that today, despite all those terrible gossips, was still a good, boring day. The kind of day that brings payment and doesn't cost the company any life or limb. He also remembered that he promised them an answer in return. The question was quite predictable from fellow warriors. "What are your weapons made of?" So he began telling them about dragonbone and Abraxan tail strings, runes increasing accuracy and amplifying drawing power, spells sharpening blades. Then, all of a sudden, a body landed next to him with a sickening crunch. One glance at it told the tale. It was one of the wizards of his company, fallen from his broom, no doubt slippery in the rain. They stood around the mangled carcass in shock. For a fellow warrior to die in such a way, it was unbelievable. Zymustus looked angrily up to the sky, uncaring for the raindrops falling into his eyes, and he saw something he did not expect. A barely visible distortion above them. It was the characteristic sign of an invisibility spell or cloak in heavy rain, subtle, not easy to spot. But he was trained and trained over 2 decades for the very purpose of spotting the subtle details. So the part about the invisible wizards is true then. Now, let's go to one of our wizards slowly, without spooking that bogey, and ask some soul detection for a little target practice. Chapter 331. Me Teacher Course. Sunday, August 25, 1996. Russian House, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge. United States of America. Jelena Kurchatova could not help but glance at MacGregor as she made her way into new house. The destroyed portions of the dormitory F, G, and H entries, not to mention I, were covered with scaffolding. Occasionally, there were holes visible in the forest of cranes, which hinted that something quite impressive was on the horizon. Although the original plan had the rebuilt sections of MacGregor ready for occupancy at the beginning of the school year, it was painfully obvious that was not going to happen. Magic could only go so far, after all. The latest schedule had the students moving into new sections in the middle of October. In the meantime, they would be put up in hotels. Kurchatova had nearly had apoplexy when the issue of the Tech had come out, splitting what was once MacGregor into 3 connected dorms. The high-rise, which still contained a through E, would continue to be known as MacGregor. J entry had been given its own front desk and renamed de Mornay Hall after Guinevere. As for F, G, and H, Kurchatova Hall seemed just wrong. She tried to convince the staff to name the new building after Radna, Black, or some other famous wizard. However, the corporation would have nothing of it. Radna hadn't done much to save Cambridge, whereas she and Guinevere had. She grunted. Well, if they're going to name the dorm after me, I'm going to make sure that the damn carpet is in a color I like. And if they do decide to make me housemaster at some point, since the previous housemaster's apartment had been washed away, they can at least have the decency to do so before I unpack. Guiding her suitcase with her wand, she used her ID card to open the new house door and made her way into Russian House like she had done so many times before. A few students were there, moving their stuff in, and they waved to her. She had nearly reached her room from last year when she realized, I don't live there anymore. Sheepishly, she turned around and headed for her new home, the 1-bedroom apartment reserved for the Russian House graduate residence tutor. The new accommodations were extremely spacious compared to a typical dorm room, and she suspected that she had a private bathroom and a sitting room. The only way to have gotten a room this size, as an undergrad, would have been to agree to hole up with 3 other girls. Wondering how long it would take her to learn to stop walking to her old room, she dropped her suitcase on the floor and began unpacking. Although packing had been easy, wave the wand at the stuff she wanted in the suitcase and say, pack. Unpacking had to be done manually, as the spell wouldn't know where each thing was supposed to go. It took her a good hour to unpack, to the point where she felt she could leave the rest until later. Her bed was made, and enough stuff was organized so that she could at least know where the essentials were. This made her start considering her next options, finding some teaching assistants. For the first time in her life, she would be teaching a major course at MIT. 19. Introduction to Magic. She had roughly a week to prepare a basic syllabus, and it finally dawned on her that she had no idea how to give lectures to the large numbers of students the school officials were expecting to attend her class. She knew what it was like to hide among the throngs of students in the back of 10250, watching the professor standing in the front of the room. Now everyone would be looking at her, and she wasn't just scared. She was terrified. Granted, she didn't have to do much research. She would just explain what she knew about magic at a relatively high level. She'd have to give homework, of course. though most of it would be reading basic magical textbooks as well as wizard fiction like the now popular Adventures with Arachnids. She couldn't exactly do magical lab work with a bunch of muggles, after all. She was going to need several teaching assistants to ensure that each student got personal attention and to grade all those papers. The problem was that only a wizard could grade 19, which meant that she would have to kidnap Guinevere's entire circle of friends in order to find enough people to do the job. Guinevere had told her that she could think of at least 5 people who would be willing to help out in exchange for free flying carpets. She had also received the resume of a Baker House student who had come out as a Curly wizard, but she was forced to dismiss him as the ability to hold a wand did not make a person knowledgeable enough about magic to grade a class. Guinevere had been surprised at first when Kurchatova recommended that the flying carpet company be called Guinevere's Flying Carpets, and not Guinevere and Jelina's Flying Carpets. Kurchatova knew that there would be absolutely no way for her to handle 19, the bureaucracy surrounding the flying carpet business, and her ordinary grad school courses at the same time. She had known from the beginning that Guinevere would have to be the senior partner in this, and Kurchatova herself would eventually serve as a member of the board or advisor. Guinevere had soon found out that she herself would need a lot of assistance getting the business off the ground, especially now that the Muggle Apparition Network was trying to compete with her. Fortunately, the door swung both ways. Just as Kurchatova had co-opted half of Guinevere's wizarding friends to help serve as teaching assistants for 19, Jason had convinced several members of Alpha Chi Gamma to recruit friends and head over to Enfield to help out Guinevere. These included several people from Course 15 Management, including one next house girl who had graduated in 1993. Getting the Alpha Chi Gamma men to help Guinevere was about as easy as getting water to run downhill. Most of them had been fascinated by Guinevere when they had visited Jason during the school year, and several of them had been acting like typical clueless 12-year-olds when it came to trying to get her attention. Considering that MIT was roughly 2/3 men, and that Alpha Chi Gamma didn't have any girls living in it, officially, it didn't take much to get them to follow Guinevere around like puppy dogs chasing a ball. In return for their support, Guinevere had given Alpha Chi Gamma a free rug. Kurchatova hadn't seen the first issue of the Daily Confusion, yet the leaflet which listed the various MIT fraternity and House Rush events for the incoming class of 2000, but she would have bet large numbers of galleons, or dollars, that trips on the flying carpet would serve as a major recruitment tool for future brothers. The fact that the rug Jason had picked out for them had the Starship Enterprise on it all but sealed the deal. Kurchatova wondered if Guinevere was tiring of Jason and was thinking of going after another guy. She hadn't heard anything about that, but who knew? The business was continuing to expand, though a little more slowly than it had before now that the Muggle Apparition Network was in play. In addition to the Crate and Barrel in the Chestnut Hill Mall, flying carpets were being sold at Culgin in Brookline, Able Rug in Brighton, and a couple of the bed and baths which had provided the first batch of rugs. The only problems which had cropped up so far with the carpets had been the various car accidents which had taken place when people took their eyes off the road to figure out what those odd rectangular objects were hovering overhead. She headed over to the Athena computer cluster to check her email. There were several good luck wishes for her new course and business, and a couple of applications for new 19 TARS or flying carpet business partners. A store had asked her to enchant her rugs, and the school had decided to make 19 a HASD, one of most important humanities courses. Kurchatova's eyebrows shot up at the next few emails. 3 schools, 1 in Needham and 2 in Newton, had asked her to speak to the students. It seemed as if her celebrity status was starting to catch up with her. How the hell was she going to handle this? She was already cutting back on the flying carpet business to pursue her studies. She really needed a time turner here, she thought. She doubted, however, she would be able to obtain one given the flap over the DeLorean. She was going to have a very, very busy semester ahead of her, and that didn't even include the responsibility of mentoring and advising dozens of Russian house students, including a large number of new freshmen. Chapter 332. Megan Baldwin Replaced. Monday, August 26, 1996, University of Oxford, United Kingdom. Megan Baldwin felt like an idiot. She'd gone home convinced there had been a family emergency, going so far as to resign her commission at Hogwarts. As it turned out, however, her mother was not dying, and no one had any idea as to who had started the rumor. She needed to tell Dumbledore, Snape, or whoever was in charge now that the emergency had been a false alarm and that she was ready to return. She had just logged into the computer to send an email to Hogwarts Albus at Hogwarts, UK, when Amelia Bell, one of the other grad students in her department, burst into the computer cluster with a piece of parchment in her hand. Amelia shoved the parchment in her face. "Check it out, Megan. It's from Dumbledore. I got the job. Here's the signed contract." Conflicting emotions raged through Megan's head. She was friends with Amelia, and she had forwarded her the new job opening as soon as she had left. Although Megan really wanted the job back, she couldn't just take it from Amelia. Besides, if Dumbledore had already signed the contract, there wasn't much anyone could do about it. Breaking magical contracts with Albus Dumbledore tended to lead to rather nasty consequences. Trying to not let her disappointment show, Megan hugged Amelia. "That's wonderful. What are you going to do now? Rent a room in Hogsmeade?" Amelia nodded. "Yup. I don't know if they take pounds, though. Does Hogsmeade have a bank which converts those galleons to real money?" "Yup. Gringotts had an annex there, which is now the firm's central office. I'd see if you can get into the Shrieking Shack now that they've renovated it." Amelia jerked back a step. "The Shrieking Shack." "It's an old house connected which is linked to the Hogwarts grounds by a secret tunnel. Apparently there had been a werewolf as a student a while back, and they bought the house so that he could transform without hurting anyone. It's protected by a nasty tree which likes to hit things." Amelia shuddered. "I think I'll pass on that. Is there a place where the 20s and 30s tend to hang out?" "A couple Perth Square and Vertic Alley are fairly popular. They aren't going to be cheap, though." "I'm renting, Megan, not buying. Don't worry about it. At any rate, do I have to make a syllabus or something like that? I haven't thought this through entirely yet." Megan fiddled with her computer for a while, found what she had been searching for, and printed out a document. Handing it to Amelia, she chuckled. "Here's the syllabus right here. I was planning to use it for this semester before that stupid rumor came along that my mum had died." Megan hesitated and then let everything out. "I must say, Amelia, that I didn't really want to leave. I feel like I got screwed really badly." Amelia frowned. "You want the job back? Do you want me to tell Dumbledore I can't do it?" Megan shook her head. "That won't work. You've already signed the contract, and from what I know about magical contracts, breaking them is a very bad idea. How long is it for?" "1 year." Megan nodded somberly. "Good. You can have next year, and I'll have the year after that. You can be my tar or something like that." Amelia saw the disappointment on Megan's face. "I can see you're upset about that false rumor. Where'd you hear it from?" Megan winced and shook her head. "I honestly don't remember, Amelia. It was almost as if it had magically appeared in my mind shortly before Dumbledore's army returned home. What's done is done, however. Good luck and keep in touch." White House. Bill Clinton stood with Persephone Ariadne at the podium. If this spell worked as advertised, the country would never have to deal with counterfeiting again. He began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to announce that thanks to the power of magic and the advice of the Xylendan ambassador, all American currency produced after January 1st will be enhanced with an anti-duplication charm. This will ensure that it cannot be duplicated or counterfeited." This spell has been in use for centuries in the wizarding community, and thanks to the fall of the Statute of Secrecy, we will be able to apply the same protection to the American dollar. Any attempts to duplicate a dollar bill or coin using magical means will produce a copy which will look like an obvious fake. Too big, too small, too heavy, and so forth. The Geminio taboo will remain in effect even after the new currency is introduced. This is because even though it no longer makes sense to duplicate American money, we need to only look at the destruction in New York and Miami to understand what the duplication charm can do in the wrong hands. San Juan County Hospital Monicello. Doctor. Workman, we lost the baby. Bobby Workman spun and faced the nurse. What do you mean, you lost the baby? I don't remember anyone in the delivery room complaining about any complications. Besides, with the wizard there, what could possibly go wrong? Wasn't he just going to shrink the baby to make the delivery easier now? Everyone's doing that now. The nurse flushed a little. The wizard is the reason we lost the baby. Workman stared at her incredulously. What do you mean? Did the wizard do something to the baby? Of course, Doctor. That's why we lost him. What did he do, Lisa? The nurse fidgeted nervously. Well, he shrank the baby as usual, delivered him, and cut the cord. We talked to the mother a little. Then we lost him. How could you lose him? I'll need to write up a report. The nurse threw her hands in the air. The baby was only a couple of inches long when he came out. Do you realize how easy it is to misplace something that small? Workman was about to scream something laced with expletives when he heard some high-pitched crying and saw the wizard racing out of the delivery room. We've got him, Dr. Workman. We lost sight of him for about 20 seconds, which caused Lisa to panic. Apparently one of the little blankets had fallen on top of him, temporarily covering him. This can happen, Dr. Workman, and I was prepared. Lisa ran out about 10 seconds before we found him again. I've restored him to his normal size, and he's crying normally, as you can hear. Workman stared at the wizard and shook his head. Next time, Watkins, can you tell everyone not to panic? It's going to take a while for everyone to get accustomed to this new style of delivery. The wizard nodded. I will, Doctor. Chapter 333. Man, I feel like a woman. Tuesday, August 27, 1996, Blackguard safe House United Kingdom Zyganov walked into the ladies' room and realized immediately that he had a problem. Sure, he was wearing a dress and had polyjuiced himself to look like his wife. However, it dawned on him that he had no idea how to go to the bathroom. As if that weren't bad enough, he had forgotten what it was like to be in his mid-20s. He had found himself ogling half of the men in town, something which was most disconcerting, especially since it made him wonder if his wife was cheating on him. This was the perfect time to try polyjuicing into a staff member. No one at the school knew Amelia Bell's personality, so he didn't need to worry about behaving in a way which would have been inconsistent with her real personality. The fact that she was teaching Muggle studies helped as well in that he didn't need to a master at various arcane studies to be able to fake his teaching abilities. The only problem was that he happened to have more Y chromosomes than Professor Bell. Just one chromosome made all the difference. Zyganov shuddered at the thought of returning to Rasputin empty-handed. The mad monk had told him to kill Dumbledore and take Dumbledore's wand at all costs, and Zyganov knew that Rasputin did not take well to failure. It finally dawned on him that he would have no choice but to ask his wife to attempt this mission in his place. Both he and his wife believed in Rasputin's motives and planned to bring Black Kashi and rule the world in the name of the Black God. Both had pledged their lives and health to his cause. However, he had to admit that he was not keen on asking his wife to actually put her life in danger. He would have done everything he could to prevent her from coming to harm. Unfortunately, it seemed that he had no choice here. Helena wouldn't have any trouble fooling the students. For all Zyganov knew, his wife could make up some stories about Muggles and the wizards would accept them since they didn't know any better. The biggest problems would involve magical methods of seeing through the disguise. The first involved the use of polyjuice potion. From what Rasputin had told him about Harry Potter's exploits at Hogwarts, thank you, Joe Rowling, it would be foolish to try to steal polyjuice components from the potions master's office. Fortunately, Rasputin had offered to supply him with enough polyjuice paraphernalia to last him a few months. This, combined with the fact that no one would know that he wasn't mimicking Miss Bell's real personality, covered that possibility. The second involved Harry Potter himself. According to Rowling, Harry Potter happened to be the owner of a remarkable magical item called the Marauder's Map. This object would not only show where everyone was in the school, but it would also see through polyjuice and identify people by their real names. Helena would have to confiscate that as soon as possible. Otherwise, Mr. Potter would be able to blow her cover before she finalized her plans to kill Dumbledore. The scheme Hogwarts had used to confiscate the map 3 years ago wouldn't work here for one simple reason. Alastair Moody, the defense against the dark arts teacher, would wind up with the map, not Helena. The most obvious solution of going invisible and stealing the map would not work, as A, Moody was an adept aura, and B, his magical eye saw through invisibility cloaks. The Zygonovs would have to think of something clever in order to get this done. Unfortunately, Zygonov couldn't think of anything clever. Even if his wife did officially confiscate the map on behalf of Hogwarts, it would look very strange for her not to immediately give it to Moody. It slowly dawned on him that if there was no way to have Harry relinquish the map to his wife, she'd have to do it the old-fashioned way. Harry Potter had to die. Only then could she go through his pockets and grab that map. Ideally, she'd kill him in a way which made it look like an accident. However, they couldn't use Avada Kedavra because that curse had apparently backfired when Voldemort had used it on Harry as an infant. Fortunately, thanks to the fall of the Statute of Secrecy, they had several weapons at their disposal which had not been available to Voldemort during his first encounter with Harry Potter. Rasputin had insisted that a Muggle weapon be used to kill off Dumbledore, otherwise Dumbledore would be able to defend himself and start a duel. Needless to say, one did not want to start a duel with Albus Dumbledore. It had to be a Muggle weapon, and it had to be a surprise. If all else failed, she could test out the technique for Dumbledore on Harry and see if it worked. Zygonov winced as he felt an odd cramp. It looked like he was about to get his period. Hopefully, the polyjuice potion would wear off before it got too bad. Muggle Apparition Network Headquarters Prescott. Rebecca Richardson nearly jumped out of her shoes when one of her new employees raced into the room with a piece of paper in her hand. The new employee waved the paper in her face in excitement. "Ms. Richardson, you've got to read this. It's better than we could have ever anticipated." Richardson looked at him in confusion. "Really? What happened?" "We're in the clear. Man can still keep operating." Richardson's eyes widened. "Wow, let me see that." The employee handed her the paper, and she started reading it. Midway through the second paragraph, she began to smile. By the time she reached the end, they were hugging each other. The Muggle Apparition Network lawsuit had been settled out of court. Man would still be permitted to apparate people once they signed a document indicating that they understood all of the risks associated with apparition. The document included a list of all of the known risks associated with apparition. The warning against pregnant women apparating was one of the first things listed, in bold type. Richardson grinned and pointed at that clause. "Very interesting, Lou. If I'm reading this correctly, they can't prosecute us if they apparate while pregnant." The employee nodded. "Yup. Legally, it would go down as user error because supposedly they'd read the fine print." Richardson continued his thought. "We don't even have to ask them if they're pregnant now. If a woman is 2 months pregnant, we no longer have to go out of the way to ask her if she's pregnant. She would know enough not to try to apparate." And if a woman doesn't know she's pregnant and loses the baby, she'll probably think that she had a weird cycle and not blame us. Exactly, Ms. Richardson. Richardson couldn't help but think of one thing. How on earth did we manage to overcome all those lawyers? Lou shrugged. The vice president liked our idea and pitched it to Clinton. The vice president, Al Gore. Yes, Ms. Richardson. Once he realized that we didn't use any greenhouse gases or oil, he became very, very interested. Trajura Island, Beach, Baltic Sea. Grand Nocturnal Andrei Drakovsky took a deep breath. He hated swimming, but now he had no choice. The wizards would soon realize that the ash in his house wasn't vampiric and that he is alive. He looked around to see if anyone was watching and then jumped into the water. He will leave this island, no matter what. Ever since Judgment Day, Drakovsky felt that the death barrier which surrounded Dracula was somehow weaker. Andrei was surprised that nobody else noticed that yet, except him, of course. Perhaps they thought that it was resistant to Judgment Day protocol. Who knows, who cares, he thought. The important thing now was to reach Denmark, which was a country outside the Vampire Control Treaty. He was strong, he could swim, even though he hated water, so he didn't see any problems. Thanks to his vampiric speed, he reached the now weaker death barrier. Still somehow unsure, he touched it with his finger. Nothing happened. He grinned. Great. After swimming through it, he felt that his powers were slowly returning to full levels. By definition, the wizards couldn't harm him beyond the barrier. He knew, of course, that not everyone followed the rules, so he decided to swim faster. Andrei thought how damned his people were by the VCT wizards. Forced to be prisoners on that island for hundreds of years, ever since his stupid grandfather, Vlad Dracul, was defeated. Drakovsky felt nothing but shame when he thought about him. It was all about to change now. Now they'll see what it means to mess with nocturnals, he said to himself, and continued swimming, Glubdubdrib. Ever since the discovery of the Glubdubdrib landmass, the efforts of exploration and colonization were equally distributed among the members of what would later be named the Gulliver Consortium. Over the course of centuries, the vast tropical island's festering swamps were drained, its raging rivers regulated by dams, its vast distances connected by stone roads, its soaring mountain ranges crossed by bridges and tunnels. Glubdubdrib's natural resources were methodically surveyed, then mined, harvested, and hunted. The consortium's members profited splendidly from the precious metals and gems, rare potion ingredients, and exotic animals. Of course, it was not a venture without risk or hardship. The mountain ranges of the island were the nesting grounds of dragons, and those weren't happy to give up their hard-earned place as local apex predators. They were more numerous and fierce than even the ones living on Spedano. It's no wonder that no Muggle ever visited the island and lived to tell the tale. And even if one stayed under the dense canopies, hidden from the eyes of the airborne monsters, it was far from safe. Devil's Snare and other carnivorous, poisonous, or otherwise deadly plants waited to kill the unwary, and that was only if the giant snakes, the lethofolds, or the acromantulas accidentally introduced in the 18th century didn't get them first. This was one of the reasons why the island's colonization progressed so slowly. Too many interests collided. Many of the beasts and weeds were precious resources themselves, and with no way to domesticate them, the investors were better off sticking to only the most vital parts of Glubdubdrib and letting nature rule the rest. The Howihenhams didn't do otherwise in their slice of the island. The presidential residence stood in the middle of a small but thriving city on the shores of a navigable river section's upper end, at the foot of the waterfall where it ended. Roads connected the city to important mining towns and the coastal ring road. Life was a bit different here. The centaurs brought along their biped servants, but only the trolls were treated harshly. With all the other humans running around, the Yahoos were treated fairly here. Also, the island had many universities and joint scientific projects, and spending some time in the multicultural atmosphere usually shaped a centaur's views into more human-friendly, pro-liberation thoughts. Nihim didn't like being here. Sure, the place was secure and far from the fighting, but he had to live together with possible traitors of his kind. It was an open secret that the egalitarian party strongly overlapped with the youths sent here to the universities. He admitted that their intentions were good. After all, the official policy ever since Gulliver's visit was to slowly uplift the Yahoos so that one day they can become the Centaur's equals. What the young fools failed to see was this. They weren't ready yet, neither of their species. The Centaurs desperately needed the work of the Yahoos, and the Yahoos desperately wanted to escape from that very work and do whatever they wanted to. Rolling in the dirt and flinging poo at each other, most likely, thought the president. But of course, the foolish foals couldn't see past the tall tales of the South's glory, about humans and centaurs living in peace and fighting together. Today, he'd meet some of his remaining supporters. Nihim hoped that at least they'll bring him good news. He didn't hear any of those ever since his remaining wizards rescued him from the rebels' clutches. He did what he could do to help his nation from here. Now, he would see what others have done to do so. At last, the guests arrived. A small group of centaurs, and surprisingly enough, a human. The centaurs, he knew. Here was Arihim, the ambassador to Raktaratl, along with Vice President Kitnam and Roghim Province's Governor Tirshin. The human was a male, and judging by his robes, a wizard from a faraway land. Sensing his gaze, the wizard bowed formally and introduced himself. Thiago Bitter, wizard from South America, advisor and liaison officer to 5,000 of my compatriots fighting for your government, at your service. The president of Howienhamland blew out an impressed whistle. 5,000 mages on our sides. Kinam, is it your doing? The vice president shaked his head and pointed at Arihim, who said, It was me, and they only asked a favor in the distant future. We haven't had the opportunity to unleash their troops in a decent battle, but their services and their advice have already proven invaluable. Nihim lifted a brow. Advice? Since when do strangers know our homeland better than ours? The ambassador replied. They do not. However, they are very familiar with the Muggle world we suddenly found ourselves being part of. They helped us to avert many fatal mistakes. The president sighed. Tell me everything, son. By the time of your capture, the Yahoo rebellion had spread over all of Howienhamland. The main rebel army, over 10,000 strong, equipped by Muggle firearms and supported by their flying vehicles, had solidified their control over Hinhinham and most of the lowlands. Much of the centaur population fled north or east, hearing that the Yahoos are committing revolting acts of cruelty. The western Horseshoe Mountains are at war, as guerrilla war parties hunt each other down in the forests. The tunnels and the bridges had been sabotaged, so the Yahoo forces had problems reaching Kinnaraz, but they are laying siege to it as we speak. Caught between the worst of the Yahoo onslaught and the rebellious south, the west is finished. Speaking of the south, Lord Garhim had sacked the rightful governor of Hylanome and is marching up north on the river road with an army of 5,000 and several mercenary wizards. To make matters worse, other foreigners had made an appearance. One Father Neru Martinez is trying to convert the Yahoos to his own faith, and he is disturbingly successful at it. Other foreigners were spotted by our scouts, trying to convert Yahoos to some absurd not religion called communism. Fortunately, it seems those two groups hate each other. With some luck, our problems will solve each other. Finally, we also have problems in the east. The governor of Chiron's Landing went mad with grief over the death of his youngest son and called for a radical solution for the Yahoo question. Warbands of the separationist militia and other radicals fly his banner as they raid humans, sadly including noncombatants. Worse still, he also hired mercenaries and got an arrangement with Siadani wizards, probably promising Yahoos to them. As for our own forces, our hold is firm on everything north of the Vashoth Spring, and we had our wizard helpers fly on scouting and hit-and-run operations over the entire north in the last few days. The success is remarkable. The Yahoo advance effectively stopped. They fear to come up in the open, and those machines of them don't fly that much anymore either. "And what of the Yahoos in our territory?" inquired Nihim. "I hope you didn't do anything rash to them." "Our first reply was to promise the death of 10 Yahoos for any centaurs slain," replied Governor Teoshin. Seeing Nihim's horrified expression, he quickly added, "But after only a few dozen executions, our friends came and advised us to lock the Yahoos up in camps instead. So now all Yahoos are either doing essential work under strict supervision, or are gathered in these internment camps, where they are guarded, but also taken care of. Our advisors explained how any death camps would cause the whole Muggle world to condemn us. This will tie down some of our manpower, but we can afford it. While I don't like to stand by and not retaliate while the Yahoos slaughter our kind, I understand now the necessity of committing as few of these war crimes as possible. Now, Mr. President, do you have any news for us?" The president seemed sad. "Yes, I have. But you won't like it. It looks like we have supporters among the Muggles, but they are in favor of dividing our nation into two halves, one for us and one for the humans. It is evident that they don't know anything about our situation. And from what I've heard, misinformed and ignorant people like these bring important decisions that would affect us all, like the idiotic Muggles who forced a bunch of oaths on their wizards. A bunch of oaths taken from a book of theirs, and those were flawed even in their fiction. So I hope we can either tell them more without losing their sympathies, or managing without them, because as things are now, we won't see any more serious international help coming our way."